Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doug. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be back here. I was here in 95, 96. I actually went from here to Namibia. There were some jokes about that because friends in the faculty, Tim Quigley and Dan Ish, were telling me I couldn't do this. I should go home. But the challenge of going to Namibia at that point, it was to teach. There was apartheid. For those of you who don't have the history, the apartheid ended in Namibia in 1990 with independence. Then it ended in South Africa 4 years later with a negotiated settlement. Namibia won its independence in a long war with South Africa, which was it's hard to say of a war unbelievably vicious on the scale of wars, but the stories are just coming out. A lot of silence, but I learned over the weekend, just researching it a bit, that you realize the Cubans saved Angola with an airlift of tanks that the CIA missed, which is kind of impressive. And then, of course, once you had the full drawn-out war in Angola, South Africa couldn't survive anymore without heavy casualties. And South Africa has the same view of casualties the United States does. War is fine as long as we don't have a lot of American farm boys killed. It's kind of obscene, but that's how Namibia became independent. It is the former colony of German Southwest Africa, which, in the long history of colonization and colonialism, the Germans played again a small part, but an incredibly vicious part. And whereas, I've been talking with people about when you talk about, what happened in Canada, colonialism, imperialism, the theft of lands, the colonial settler states, they have a kind of common history that's kind of commonly depressing. The word genocide comes up in the context of residential schools, for example, destroying cultures. The Germans actually used genocide in Namibia. We have, I have a quote, Luther von Trapp, the Herero War, 1904-1905, fought here. They drove the Herero out into the desert. This is the Kalahari. And Luther von Trapp issued a famous proclamation that any Herero he ever saw again in Namibia, men, women, or child, he would kill, or should be killed. And then I found a monument to him this morning as I was preparing. In Hamburg, quoting him again, Africans bend only to use such force with harsh terror and even with cruelty was and remains my policy. I exterminate the rebellious cry in streams of blood and streams of money. They killed between 75 and 80% of the nation. The Herero, needless to say, came back after the war. South Africa lost. Germany lost the World War I and lost Namibia in that war. There was fighting in Namibia. It's still amazing today to see how colonial Namibia is. German colonial buildings everywhere. The country is awash with Germans. New York Times had an article, there's one colony left in Africa, the Germans still have Namibia. Germans love it, they come every day. You can actually, those of you who are wildlife nuts, you can fly to Windhoek, have a rental truck, four-wheel drive at the airport, and drive north, and somewhere between 5 and 8 hours, you'll run into elephants. And when you run into elephants, you stop, and you wait, because they'll push you off the road. There's always a sentinel watching the group. So it's an amazing country in that sense, and it has a very elaborate, give you the geography here, you can sort of see it in 3 colors. Oh, we have more colors over there. This is the land map. This is interesting because it would be the same in 1918. It's unchanged, except for land reform, which we'll get to in a second. I guess they're coming out as beige. The beige lands, 15%, are government lands. most of these are wildlife parks. Etosha's the size of Connecticut or Prince Edward Island, right there. One of the great wildlife parks in the world. Bablata, where I like to work, is up here. Nauclift is here. The Skeleton Coast is up there. 15% of the country's park. It's accessible, it's beautiful. This is the diamond area, where diamonds lie on the ground, and you can go pick them up. Diamonds being, the De Beers diamond cartel started in Namibia. It's now 4th or 5th in the world in diamonds. I think Canada's actually passed it. Diamonds are one of the largest exports. This is a fenced area, you can't go there. The government land. The green lands are all the former homelands declared by South Africa. And there are 10 of them, one for each nationality. And 1964, that's what they did. I told this to Saunders earlier today. Well, when I was first there, I asked, I've been in South Africa and noticed, the multicultural in South Africa is wonderful. There's a huge and powerful Indian population. I asked why there were no Indians in Namibia, and someone said it wasn't zoned for them. Not one Indian in Namibia, because it wasn't zoned for them. But that's the level of control they had. So the indigenous people of Namibia, and this is important in the context of perhaps Saskatchewan, were on their own land, by and large. The exceptions were the Nama here, the Herero there, the Damara and the San, who are over here, San being Bushmen, who were pushed out of their land in central Namibia by the Germans. The German farms then are the, what is this, dark brown? The so-called commercial farms. 5,500 of them, more or less. They're numbered. I actually have a map with the farms numbered. The Germans settled here. This is a high plain. It looks like Utah or Nevada. No malaria, no tsetse flies. It's ranching country. Southern Alberta. 1,500, 1,800 German farmers settled there. Then, after the South Africans took over from the UN, League of Nations mandate in 1915, after the war, 1919, when the war was concluded, they moved in, it depends who you ask. The Namibians will tell you they moved in poor Boers, meaning poor economically, not bad Boers. But the South Africans filled the country with Afrikaner farmers. Today, the population to date is only 6% white. 20,000 Germans, about 40,000 Afrikaners, about 10,000 remainder, mostly English and Portuguese. Portuguese moved down after, it's Angola on top. So that's the geography. You've got to get the geography to understand that when we're talking land reform, you're looking at 1.3, 1.4 million people living in the green areas, all black. And 50,000 whites, 60,000 whites owning farms all through the center of the country. Farms are, by and large, cattle ranches. It's a very arid country. If I could switch maps, I've got a map that shows the southern half being basically sand. But it's very arid, so you're dealing with cattle ranching. Up on the top end, Namibia gets wetter and warmer as you get north. So another irony is that the best land in the country is in the hands of blacks, the land you could actually farm. They're growing corn, wheat, sorghum, up by Tsumeb, up north Ojurango, that part of the country. This being cattle ranching. Southern part of the country is essentially wasteland. It's been sheep and goats for years. There was a caracal industry, but it's gone. So you're looking at, to get to land reform, you're looking at a degraded agricultural environment. I mean, anybody ever raise cows? I have a farming extraction, I raise cows. There's actually not a lot of money in raising cows. And one of the interesting things about Namibian agriculture is that it's a sort of wrecked colonial agriculture. It hasn't evolved like Saskatchewan in the sense of the modern farming systems. You've had basically German farming families that have been raising cattle for years and years. The average farm is probably making $20,000 a year on an investment of $2 million. So these are German families that have diversified their money all over the country. They have their own brewery, whatever industry they have. They're in meat packing, they're in tourism. Families have spread out over the years. So it's a challenging agriculture environment. So that's the overall environment. Let me just try to say a few words about law and the creation of a legal order. One of the things about land reform that I found that I'd like to at least impress on law students is that it's a staggeringly important legal challenge, but the mechanics of it are as complicated as anything could be. Yet you do that with a very limited, think of the legal apparatus in Canada or in the United States. There isn't a comparable legal apparatus in Namibia. When I was there in 1995, there were no black lawyers. And your white lawyers were essentially conveyancers. Like, what do you do in a backwater that's based on agriculture? I mean, you might think of the Saskatchewan bar in the 1950s. Maybe that's an unfair comparison. But it's not a progressive bar. It's not an imaginative bar. They're conveyancers. They're doing land law and small business law. But then you come up in 1990 with a brand new constitution. The Constitution is written by a law professor, South African law professor. And he wrote a draft, and SWAPO, the ruling party of Namibia now, is in exile. They came back and were negotiating, and in order to take state power, they needed the Constitution. They said, we'll take it. They grabbed the draft, which was actually a brilliant move, because nobody expected it. And they have state power then. So SWAPO is back, they're running the country. The Constitution is a pretty ordinary Constitution. It's the standard trade-off you get in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia. Article 16 guarantees all forms of property. So white property rights were guaranteed. Then people start, then the issue becomes, they've created their own impediment to land reform. Because you have to buy it at fair market value. Expropriation is actually in the Constitution, allowing expropriation at fair market value. The problem is the government has no money. The government is committed to land reform from the beginning. They have a national land conference. All the peoples of Namibia come together. And it's evidently a wonderful conference. I wasn't there then. And they talk about what people need. How do poor people need to move forward on the land in Namibia? Really a wonderful conference about the relationship between people and land. Land being the mother, land which had been taken away, land which they had a chance to get back. Enormous optimism. When I got to the law faculty, the big issue was that 1995 now, 5 years from the minutes, nothing had happened. Because of course there's no legal infrastructure. You get a constitution in 1990. I had the perfect job in 96, I guess, teaching law. Law professors will all laugh at this. We didn't have any law. We had the Constitution. The Constitution had a saving clause that South African law ran unless it was unconstitutional or until it was changed. So students would come with some really awful South African statute and say, what do you make of this? And I would say, it's a South African statute. They'd say, is it still legal? And I'd say, well, it is legal because it hasn't been overturned, but it's obviously unconstitutional, which means you don't follow it. There's nothing in between. All the police who were on duty stayed on duty till they were replaced. How do you have a revolution, right? You go from one day it's white, and the next day it's black. There's a new constitution, but there's no law. The Constitution itself is law. So in teaching, I had 12 students. I was co-teaching with a Namibian, the only Namibian in the law faculty. The faculty was entirely foreign, no Namibian black lawyers. We're trying to teach Namibian human rights as a required course in the second year. My other law school joke, I guess, is that I've decided they wanted to create a culture of human rights at the center of their law because it was going to be a new kind of country because of the way that it was created, because of the war, because of the violence, because of apartheid. They had a vision. And we were going to put human rights law center of the law school, beginning of the second year required course. 12 students. One of my students is Penduka Ivana, who is one of two candidates likely to be the next president of Namibia. She fought with me through the whole class. She was the Minister of Sport while she was in law school. She got called up on it by the Free Press. She said, there's no problem. There's no work being Minister of Sport. I can go to law school. Which is, I mean, they can sort that out. She's a brilliant student, honest. Nothing could please any law professor more than to train a president, right? The problem is, if you want just a bit of Namibian culture, who the next president is was supposed to have been decided by a meeting of the SWAPO Politburo on September 18th. The meeting was postponed because there is trouble. No one knows what's going on. SWAPO is an iron party with a Politburo. They will elect her or Hagi Geingob vice president of the party. The president of the country, whose term's expiring, is the president of the party. So the vice president of the party will be the next president of the country. I have no idea what's going on. I'm hoping she emerges. But just to kind of window what's going on, we trained her. She was a bright student, sat in the front row, argued with me incessantly. She was a bit to the left of me. People are laughing. She would be an ultra-leftist in many contexts. It is a Marxist party. They're not running the country as Marxists. It's a democracy. There's a free press. The SWAPO has 70-80% of the vote. They're based on the Ovambo people of the north who waged the war. The opposition will get 15% of the vote. So whoever they pick will get elected. The law faculty was wonderful. We're teaching cases. When the Supreme Court would come out with a case, we'd Xerox it, hand it out to the students. We'd all read it together, and then try to talk about what it meant. In the middle of all this, I'm kind of an activist, and we had a human rights documentation center that was financed by the government that didn't do anything. And myself and the Namibian I was teaching with decided we got handed it because we had the course in human rights. And we thought, we'll get out there and we will document. We can't practice law, but it's a human rights documentation center. We'll get involved in human rights issues, we'll document them, and we'll hand them over to Legal Assistance Center, which is the only public interest law firm in the country. And that way, we and our students can share in the developing human rights that are unfolding in our country. We find out, you get calls at the law school from people. I'm in jail. There's no legal aid, right? That's pretty good. Having met the first legal aid lawyer in Saskatchewan earlier today, isn't it amazing? We can remember when legal aid started in Saskatchewan. There's no legal aid in Namibia. It shouldn't surprise anybody, but that's where it was. Incredible calls about women's rights. Women had blacks are under traditional law. Whites are under state law. Traditional law was, and it wasn't even traditional law, it was sort of an apartheid version of traditional law, which meant that women had no rights at all. All of that was changed very quickly. SWAPO is, one thing they're past is gender bias. Penduka Tana will be, one of the second or third woman president in Africa if she makes it. She's been running the party for years. The women's rights stuff was important, and we had a lot of that, but the government was on it in a good way. The other set of issues we had were land issues. Blacks had no land. You're dealing with, your white standard of living in Namibia is roughly comparable to Northern Europe, Germany, Sweden, Norway. Your black standard of living, a third of blacks are $1 a day, a third are $2 a day. The other third are in the economy at the Namibian minimum wage, which is $6 or $8 a day. And you may be able to live on that, but $1 or $2 a day you can't live on. Just to give you an example, the staple in Namibia is mealie meal, cornmeal. A 50 kilo bag is $24, $25. If you're making $1 a day, that's a bag a month with nothing in it. You have hunger issues in the north. It's awful. Black people in their homelands are living in mud huts on communal land, which is divided into 1 and 2 acre plots that they cultivate by hand. They cultivate corn and sorghum and every vegetable they can grow. And what they do with this is they make it into the vegetables that they put on the mealie meal, which means if you have a farm of a couple of acres, at least you have the prospect of being able to eat. Nothing more than that. The standard of living in Namibia has gone down since independence. The same thing is true of South Africa, I understand. The idea is simply that once you move to equality, it costs money. Land reform isn't efficient. And that leads to sort of another round of issues when you're up against the World Bank, the World Monetary Fund, Bill Gates. They're seeing land reform as being impossible because it's not efficient. There's an attack on the communal lands, a land grab of communal lands. People in communal lands don't contribute to the world economy. They're trying to eat. A huge sort of conflict in the way you see the world. So that's where we were stuck. And I'm doing, okay. That's where we're stuck in 1995. The government was committed to land reform. They did the best they could. There's 2 stories here, and I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to originally hold myself to 35 so I can take questions. It feels a little bit like vaudeville. On one hand, they peacefully distribute 1,200 farms from black to white, which is 25% of the farms in Namibia. So 25% of these farms, mostly starting in the Windhoek area going north. There hasn't been as much in the south. The land in the south is much poorer. There are many fewer blacks in the south. So it makes sense. They should be redistributing the best land in the north, in my view. So on one hand, 1,200 farms get distributed in 20 years peacefully. This is as good as it gets. The bad half of that is that it's a sloppy process. There's a lot of land grabbing, a certain amount of corruption, some ministers get rich. But Namibia's not, I always joke it's about as corrupt as the United States is. On the World Index of Corruption, it ranks in the 20th percentile, which means that 20% of the countries are more honest, 80% are more dishonest. There's marginal corruption, no question about it. The method that's used is not clean and neat. Most of us who were there in 95, 96 assumed they would expropriate. And if you read about land reform, and someone in the faculty said, well, it must be easy, you could just study the successful land reforms in the world. The answer is you can't, because half of them are communist. And you can't study communist land reforms because if you say Cuba has had really successful land reform, people have a political problem with that. So it's not an objective scientific issue exactly. So we assume the government would expropriate. The government does not start expropriating. The government comes out with a willing buyer, willing seller principle and a statute that requires every farm to be offered to the government for first refusal. The government is committed to being, I think, ultra-democratic. How does willing buyer, willing seller work? Well, I mean, give you an example. 1,000 farms come up, and they take 200 of them. They let the other 800 go back into the private sector. The answer is A, they don't have money, and B, 800 of those farms are in lousy shape. You can't make a living on them. But they buy 200 farms, and they resettle them with blacks. They have this would drive you all crazy if you get it. There's no list. There's 200,000 people who are interested in land reform. They've expressed an interest. You register. You register on a form. The form goes off into the bureaucracy. You never see it again. Finally, somebody picks 14 black families to get resettled. And a truck comes and picks them up. And they take them to a resettlement farm. They've got weeks' notice, and they drop them off. And I'm thinking, again, I'm a farm boy. Subsidies. What about agricultural subsidies? How did Wisconsin and Saskatchewan get settled? They were settled with enormous governmental support for agriculture. Land grant universities. I went to the University of Wisconsin, a parallel of the University of Saskatchewan. And I was, in all these workshops. The resettlement farmers are dropped off to live in rural poverty, do the best they can. If they've got cattle or sheep or goats, they bring the goats. The resettlement farms are in really bad shape. The work I've been doing mostly is a critique of the resettlement farms, where we would just go out and visit them, and our line has been, we support land reform. You want the resettlement farmers to get the support that they need. Think about the support the Afrikaner farmers got in the first place to settle the same lands. You're talking hypothetically as much money in support as you are in the resettlement farm. A farm might cost 2 or 3 or 4 million Namibian dollars, 8.7 to 1 this morning. So that would mean a 4 million Namibian dollar farm would be 500,000 Canadian. Resettlement farms went, poor people on them, but they went. If you go there are people on this land struggling to live. And at worst, you can say they're struggling to live in the same way they were before. They're not any worse off. At best, some of them are better off. They've got more cattle, more land. The black cultures are culturally people who have valued cattle, and African cattle are beautiful. Not these inbred monstrosities that we grow in North America. They have lots of different colors and lots of different sizes, lots of different shapes. No genetic uniformity. It's kind of great. But it went badly, and it went slow. Okay, next step, the government is under enormous pressure for land reform. The government announces expropriation. And expropriation just plays badly. Plays like, for example, what if you're a SWAPO party with a Politburo? What do people say? The Germans, who are influential in Namibia, own about 400 farms, go a little crazy. And then what does the government start doing? They start expropriating farms of a few bad farmers, the most notoriously racist, awful farmers. So your farm expropriated as punishment. It's not a way, they're arguing, the beauty of expropriation is you can have national planning. You can take a region and you can develop a group of black farms together with some synergy, with some support services, with some efficiency. You don't just, zap a farm here and zap a farm there because it's a bad farmer. You get a certain amount of that, which is payback. It's political payback. And then they expropriated a few more farms, and then for some reason, up to about 8 farms, they expropriate 3 German farms. And what happens? The Germans sue them. The case is Kessel. There's a pamphlet on it online you can get, Kessl. They take it, 3 German farmers sue, arguing that expropriation is unconstitutional, which is interesting because it's in the Constitution. And the arguments they use are the arguments of the National Farmers Union, which is the white farmers organization. And those of you who know anything about expropriation, it's basically legal in Canada for a public purpose. Well, they argue that since land reform has failed, taking farms for land reform is not for a public purpose. And then there's a language about agricultural. There's an agricultural basis. They argue, well, since there's no agriculture, since the resettlement farmers are failed, there's no agriculture. Therefore, it's not a legitimate purpose. Okay. In the High Court, the judge rejects that. He finds it constitutional, but he finds the government violated Article 18, administrative due process, in that there was nothing in the process that was documented or reasonable or fair or anything. In fact, there's a board that's charged with advising the minister on expropriation. While the board is meeting, the minister sends the expropriation orders to be delivered by the Namibian army. These are peaceful farmers. There's just no point. So the land board is meeting to advise the minister on expropriation while the minister is sending the army to serve the expropriation order. And you've got the timestamps on it. It's served at 6 o'clock, 300 miles from where the deliberation is held. And the land wasn't valuated. The law requires it being valuated by 3 evaluators competently. It wasn't valuated. It requires that it be assessed for its farming suitability, and a document of the assessment be conveyed to the minister. None of it existed. So it was thrown out as administrative due process. We're sitting at the Legal Assistance Center saying, this is a problem of the government's capacity. The Ministry of Lands in Namibia has no lawyer. It gets legal assistance from the Ministry of Justice. And there's someone in the Ministry of Justice who sort of helps them out, but no one who's specialized in land matters for the government anywhere. There's a complicated law of expropriation. We could have taught this in law school, right? Had we known. So it gets struck down in the High Court. Blistering judgment. Judgment is 60 pages long. Severely critical of the Minister of Lands, who is current President Pohamba. Ministers of lands have a tendency to rise to the presidency because land is so important. Penduka Itana, my student, was also Minister of Lands earlier. So they're criticizing the president for having messed this up. Not good. The government stops expropriating. They just can't do it. And they don't appeal. It's a high court decision. There's an independent judiciary. The government, A, doesn't want the visibility, B, doesn't think it can win it. I like I've done a lot of work in Namibia. Both sides of Kessel cited my work. You love it? The government cited my work for how complicated land reform was. The Germans cited my work for how messed up it was. It didn't turn out to be. What can you do, right? Your work is used however it's used when it comes out. Okay. Expropriation's down. Next step, a land tax. You all know that taxation is just another form of expropriation, right? I mean, what is it? The power to tax is the power to destroy. It's an American aphorism. But you realize if I just put a 27% land tax on your farm, you're in deep trouble. So they put a land tax on farms. There's never been a land tax in Namibia. The government's position was this was a part of an agricultural subsidy to support farmers, not taxing them. They come up with a land tax of 0.75%. For the first farm, plus 0.25 for each additional farm, 1.75 for foreign owners, of whom there are 4,000, 10% foreign owners. Foreign owners cannot buy into Namibia, but existing foreign owners are protected in the Constitution legally. Foreign owners do buy into Namibia illegally by by buying shares of corporations or setting up phony corporations. I could buy land and land contracts held in phony names, kind of like Ontario in the 1840s. Just been studying that. The land tax provides more money for willing buyer and willing seller, and it provides another boost for making purchases. And it means more farms are taken. In the meantime, 2004, the government comes up with an affirmative action loan scheme. This is the last. So we're now on our fourth method. Well, actually, there's a fifth method. The land tax was just quadrupled. 4 times? Quadrupled. So land tax has gone from 0.75 to 0.3. I calculated this is about the same as the tax on my land in New York. So they're paying a 3% land tax since like last week. The farmers are meeting right now in Windhoek saying we can't pay it, the white farmers. The land tax will pay for 40 farms a year, willing buyer and willing seller. So that would be 400 farms in the next 10 years, 800 farms in the next 20 years. Roughly the same rate going on. The government would own 50% of the farms by 2032. So on the land tax, then we have a two-pronged land tax. The last thing is the government comes up with an affirmative action scheme. The Agribank of Namibia, which is a government bank, is going to make low-interest loans to black farmers. 0% for the first 3 years, sliding scale rising to 9% in the 10th year. I don't want to own a farm at 9% interest myself, but 0% is not bad. 700 black farmers buy farms using these loans. These are, getting back down into here, the Herero farmers are quite good at raising cows, and there are a lot of them. Ovamba farmers the same. There's money in there. There's a long history of farming. People have been good at it. There's been a lot of black mobility since independence. 700 blacks in Namibia can afford to buy these farms. The question now is what's going to happen to these? It goes back 8 years. You've seen the sliding scale. None of them have had to pay 9% very long. Half of these loans are in arrears. The president of Agribank has a loan that's in arrears. The minister, the last minister of lands has a loan that's in arrears. The government's, the arrears are great. There's a free press. They publish their names. We know they're in arrears. They're all saying that they're doing the best they can. It's really hard to be a farmer. That's true. We don't know how that's going to sort out. One is that the government will have half these farms back, or Agribank will have half these back in 10 years, to which I respond, I don't care. They've still gone from a white farmer to a state bank, right? And the government can then do with the farm, it's going to be sold as a bankruptcy sale, right? Which would be great. The other view is that these farmers will actually make it. 9 years is nothing in the history of a farm. They will shake it out, figure something out. The problem is that, remember, the average income from a white farm is $20,000. If you're servicing a loan of $300,000 or $400,000 US, do the math. The $20,000 won't pay the interest. So there is an instability there. Now, one view is that why do the Germans still own farms? They own farms because they like to have farms. You farm because you're rich, not you're rich because you farm. So the other view is that these 700 black farmers will make enough money at their jobs in Windhoek, and they'll like to keep the farms. Both presidents, by the way, have bought farms on their own. Namibians love farms. I like farms. Like retiring to a farm is really great. So one view is that with the change from black to white and the elimination of apartheid, enough blacks will support this to keep going and actually farm it. The hope is that this is where it's at as of 2012, and it changed. I was working over the week. The increase in land taxes is of last week. The long-term issues here all turn on world agriculture, don't they? I mean, if the farmers make it, the real concern is you don't want a loss of productivity. Because, the world needs food, the country needs foreign exchange. Agriculture is only about 5 or 7% of Namibia's foreign exchange. How many cows can you sell in the world market? Namibia is now tourism, diamonds, other kinds of mining, fishing, service sector, a huge trade with Namibia and Zambia and the Congo. It's a booming economy in that sense. Actually, a growing economy. It's in quite good shape. So what we're looking at is the fate of world agriculture. And that gets us back to a comment I made at the beginning. It's the global land grab. One good thing about the global land grab is that it hasn't gone that heavily into cattle growing in Africa yet, although it is in cattle growing in Latin America. Obviously the world is going to be short of natural resources increasingly as it goes on. The World Bank favors consolidation in big units. There have already been big land grabs in the communal lands. To really augment the communal lands they work is going to be very complicated. At the same time, if central Namibia can keep functioning with a reasonable cattle economy, that's not going to be a bad thing in 20 years, assuming you're not a vegetarian. The cattle mostly go to Western Europe. They're grass-fed. They're not feedlot cattle, which means the meat is tougher, but it's better for you. They don't use chemicals. It's not a bad niche, buy grass-fed Namibian beef, right? So there's a lot of hope here. And, it seems, whatever these compromises have been, it's all stable. Like, it's going to go on like this for the next 10 or 20 years. Assuming my student, Penduka, if Tana doesn't, she'll keep on with this. We're looking at a successfully accomplished land reform situation in Southern Africa. The big problem is that the communal areas are incredibly poor. and how you get money from the center to the edge in this process is another problem. It's not clear that agriculture alone can solve that. Agriculture can feed them better. The area I work in, I've been working in Capriti most recently. The people of Capriti are poorer than the rest of the people in Namibia, but they eat better because they have a better traditional farming system. And a lot of this was destroyed by the Afrikaner South African government. That's being rebuilt, and it's enormously slow and enormously painful, but it's happening, and the wildlife is still there, right? And there's that joke about how, you know, until the people are okay, you're not going to have any wildlife. You've got to strike that balance. It's an extremely hard balance. But elephants do trample fields all over northern Namibia. You get compensated. You don't get in the way of the elephant, right? So, you know, it's all hopeful. I don't know what, I've been actually trying to write a book, and the book was going to be talking about how the different peoples in Namibia lived on the land and how their relationship with the land structured who they were in the world and how that was going to take, this corner of Africa in the next century. I can't write the book because it's stuck. There is a mid-story here, and you want land reform to be a good story, and it's not coming out. On the other hand, having been a law professor, or being a law professor, you want law to intervene and change the world. On the other hand, we never told anybody it was going to be fast or smooth. You just can't imagine this being fast or smooth. So one view is that it's an optimistic legal story, and it's the best story we could get. And I guess that's a great place to end, isn't it?